She said I saved her life, but the truth is she nearly ruined mine. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of dull, heavy Tuesday where the rain doesn't fall, but it threatens to. The sky hung gray and bloated, and the air inside our house was thicker than the clouds outside. I was halfway through folding laundry when I saw her through the window barefoot, walking up our gravel driveway, holding a trash bag like it was a purse. Her name was Elara. She looked like a misplaced ghost white sundress soaked at the hem, mascara blurred, like she'd cried halfway through a storm. And when I opened the door, she didn't say hello. She just looked me in the eye and whispered I had nowhere else to go. Elara was my husband's daughter from his first marriage, my stepdaughter. But we hadn't spoken in 5 years. Not since the wedding. Not since what happened that night. And yet, there she was standing in my doorway, calling me her guardian angel, like the past never happened. Like I hadn't spent the last half-decade trying to bury the memory of her in a place so dark even I couldn't find it again. Please, she said, don't make me go back. And I didn't. That was the first mistake, letting her in. But it wasn't the last. God help me, it wasn't the last. I should have told her no. Sent her to a hotel, called her father, done anything but what I did, which was open the door, step aside, and watch her drift into my life like smoke through a crack. But Elara had always had that effect. Even when she hated me, even when her words could cut like broken glass, there was something in her that made you want to protect her. Maybe it was her fragility, or maybe it was the way she looked at you like you were the only person left in a world full of people who had failed her. She had been 23 when I married her father, 23 and furious. "You're not my mother," she'd said during the reception. "You'll never be." I remember the champagne glass sweating in my hand as I smiled through her cruelty. Her mother had died 6 years before I met Victor. I didn't try to replace anyone. But Elara had decided before she ever shook my hand that I was the enemy. Victor never helped. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't brave either. He avoided confrontation like a coward hides behind politeness. He told me to give Elara time, that she was grieving still. But grief doesn't burn that long, not unless someone keeps feeding the fire. So I stayed out of her way, until the night she moved in. She didn't tell me why she left Boston, just that she couldn't go back. She had a bruise on her collarbone shaped like a thumbprint, and when I reached for her shoulder to offer comfort, she flinched like I'd hit her. I wanted to ask questions. I didn't. Instead, I gave her the guest room at the end of the hall, the one with the lavender walls and the old writing desk no one used. She showered for over an hour, and when she came out, the smell of eucalyptus followed her like a shroud. She wore one of my bathrobes, the pink one with the monogrammed L. She looked younger, fragile, almost soft. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea long after midnight. She told me bits and pieces that her fiancé had changed, that she felt like she'd become a stranger in her own home, that she missed her mother most on quiet nights like these. "I used to think you were trying to replace her," she said suddenly, her voice low. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch awkward and raw. "I was wrong," she added, not looking at me. "You're nothing like her." She didn't mean it as an insult, but I felt the sharpness anyway. "You're stronger," she said after a beat. "Colder, maybe, but stronger. I don't know what hurt more, being compared to a woman I never met, or realizing I liked that she saw me as strong." When she finally stood to go to bed, she turned and said, "Thank you for letting me stay. I know I don't deserve it." I told her it was nothing. But something shifted that night. Something subtle but undeniable. The house felt different with her in it. Alive somehow. Or haunted. I didn't know which yet. It was 2 weeks after Elara moved in that I stopped pretending I was just being kind. Victor had gone on a business trip to Austin, 4 nights, 5 days, the kind of travel that used to make me miss him, and now just made the house quieter in a way I liked. Elara and I had found a strange rhythm. She slept most of the morning, stayed quiet during the day, and came alive after sunset like a nocturnal creature finding comfort in the dark. We'd started cooking dinner together, half out of convenience, half out of habit. She liked making dishes her mother used to cook: eggplant, lasagna, rosemary chicken, grilled peaches with honey. We never mentioned the bruises again. We never talked about her past or mine, and for a while that was enough, until the night it rained. A storm had rolled in fast, the kind that shakes the windows and makes the lights flicker. I was reading in the living room, pretending not to notice how long she'd been watching the lightning from the porch. At some point, I got up, walked over, and stood beside her in the open doorway. She was barefoot again. The hem of her sleep shirt was wet from stepping into the rain. It clung to her skin in a way that felt too intimate for comfort, and yet I didn't turn away. She looked at me with those eyes, not seductive, not even playful, just knowing. like she'd felt something in the dark and wanted to see if I'd feel it too. "It smells like rosemary," she said almost dreamily. "Like the chicken we made the night before Mama died." And then she started crying. Not the loud kind. The kind that leaks out of you slowly, like your body is trying to let go of something it's carried too long. I reached for her. She didn't pull away. She leaned into my shoulder, her fingers curling around the edge of my cardigan like a child clinging to a blanket. We stayed like that for a moment until the lightning cracked close and the power went out. We both gasped, then laughed, that nervous, breathy kind of laugh that only comes when you're scared or about to do something you shouldn't. "Come inside," I whispered. But instead of going back to the living room, she walked toward the kitchen, lit a candle, sat at the table. "You always make me feel safe," she said. "Like I can finally breathe when I'm near you." I sat across from her. I should have said something motherly, distant. I should have reminded her that I was her stepmother. Instead, I said, "I know the feeling." And then, silence. Heavy, weighted, until she reached out her hand, and I took it. We didn't say another word. Her thumb brushed over my knuckles. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something far worse, longing. I should have let go, should have stood up, should have turned on every light and reminded her who I was and who she was and why this couldn't ever happen. But I didn't. Instead, I let the candle burn low and her hand stay in mine. Instead, I looked into her eyes and saw something that made every boundary I had ever lived by blur. And when she stood up and stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like she was testing me, I didn't move. When she whispered, "I won't if you don't want me to," I didn't answer. And when she kissed me, soft, hesitant, then certain, I kissed her back. Just once, but once was all it took. Because I felt it then, the unraveling, the slow, silent shredding of the life I'd built of the woman I thought I was. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click with every slow turn. My body still hummed with the echo of her touch, just a hand on mine, a kiss like a secret. But it was enough to ignite a fire I had no words for. And worse than the guilt was the part of me that didn't feel guilty at all. I told myself it was just a moment, one fragile, confused, emotionally charged moment between two women under the same roof during a storm. That's all. Except it wasn't. Because I still remembered how she smelled lavender and rain, and the look in her eyes when she pulled back like she'd waited years for me to finally see her. And maybe I had. The next morning, Elara acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, toasted bagels, asked me if I wanted the usual. No lingering glances, no awkward silences. Just calm, measured Elara folding herself back into the domestic rhythm like she hadn't undone my entire sense of self 12 hours before. I followed her lead. I said nothing, did nothing. I drank the coffee, ate the bagel, pretended the candlelit moment in the kitchen never happened. Victor texted that afternoon flight delayed back tomorrow instead. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Take your time. All quiet here." That was a lie. Everything was loud inside me now, my memories, my conscience, my hunger. I caught myself looking at her too long, then hating myself for it. I avoided mirrors. I scrubbed the kitchen floor like it had witnessed a crime. That night she knocked on my bedroom door. Softly. Once. I didn't answer. I couldn't. But I didn't sleep either. My mind kept playing tricks on me, conjuring the scene over and over. Her fingers brushing mine. The slight tremble in her breath. The moment right before we kissed, when we knew and still chose not to stop. Was it desire? Or was it something darker? Something born from grief, confusion, displacement? I told myself I was comforting her. That it had come from a place of care. That I was filling the role she needed in that moment. But what role was that? Mother? Savior? Lover? No, I couldn't be all three. And yet, hadn't she said I made her feel safe? Hadn't I let her? I couldn't tell anyone. Not Victor, not friends, not even my therapist, if I still had one. There wasn't a language for what I was feeling that didn't make me sound like a monster. So I rationalized. I told myself she was hurting. That I was hurting. That two broken people can lean on each other without it meaning something more. But I was lying. To myself most of all. Because deep down I didn't want to forget that kiss. And a part of me, one I didn't recognize, one I didn't trust, wanted it to happen again. Victor came home the next day. He didn't notice anything, of course he didn't. He never did. He walked in, kissed my cheek, absently dropped his suitcase in the hallway, and asked what was for dinner before he'd even taken off his shoes. Elara appeared from the guest room wearing jeans and one of my old cardigans. Her hair was pulled back, face-clean expression unreadable. "Hey, Dad," she said casually, hugging him like she hadn't been gone 5 years, like her arrival hadn't turned this house inside out. Victor's face lit up. "Elara, you didn't tell me you were coming." She smiled politely. It was last minute. They talked at the kitchen counter while I finished chopping onions, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Elara told him a half-truth about needing space from Boston, about bad choices, and starting over. He nodded, offered advice, never once asked what she was running from. He never asked what I was holding in either. That night we had dinner like a family. Victor poured wine. Elara complimented my cooking. I laughed in all the right places. And when he went to bed early, claiming travel fatigue, Elara and I were left alone in the dim kitchen with the soft clink of dishes and the hum of the dishwasher. She stood next to me at the sink, her shoulder brushing mine as I rinsed a plate. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," she said quietly. I didn't answer. She reached for a towel, dried the plate, handed it back. Her voice faltered. That night, I needed to feel something other than fear. I kept my eyes on the water. "And what did you feel?" She hesitated. "Safe, warm, like I wasn't disgusting, like I wasn't broken." I turned to her then, and for the first time, I saw her not as my stepdaughter, not as Victor's child, but as a woman damaged, yes, but determined to reclaim her body, her emotions, her power. "Whatever that moment was," I whispered, "we can't let it happen again." She nodded. But she didn't look sad. She looked certain. And when she stepped back, her hand brushed against mine intentionally. Victor asked me a week later why things felt different in the house. "Is it just me," he said, "or is something off?" I smiled and stirred my tea. "Nothing's off. Everything's exactly as it should be." But deep down I knew. We'd crossed a line, and even if our feet were planted safely back on the right side, our shadows still lived on the other. Some lines aren't drawn in sand. They're drawn in silence. And silence, I've learned, can be louder than a scream. Elara stayed. Weeks passed, and she slipped seamlessly into our lives. Victor was thrilled. He told everyone his daughter was home again. He saw it as a second chance to be a better father, a redemption arc, and I let him have it. Because every good lie needs a believable backdrop. To the outside world, we were a family. Victor went to work. I kept the house. Elara started volunteering at the community center, said it gave her structure. She came home with stories of troubled teens and yoga moms, and how she liked being invisible to them. "It's peaceful being no one," she said one evening, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her tea. But I noticed the way she watched me when Victor wasn't looking. Small glances that lingered too long. Touches that seemed accidental until they weren't. I started locking my bedroom door, not because I was afraid of her, but because I wasn't sure what I'd do if she knocked again. Every now and then she'd leave notes. Nothing dramatic, just post-its. "You looked sad today. I liked your hair that way. You're not invisible to me." I never responded, but I never threw them away either. One Sunday I found her in the garden, pruning the roses in a sundress that floated too easily on the breeze. Victor was inside, asleep in the den. She looked up as I approached. "You were watching me through the kitchen window," she said, not as an accusation, just a fact. "I was checking if you needed help." She smiled. "I don't, but I like when you check." I should have turned away, walked back inside. But instead I sat beside her on the low stone ledge. The air smelled of soil and citrus, and her arm brushed mine when she leaned in, voice quiet. "Sometimes I wish you were the one I'd grown up with, not my mother." It knocked the wind out of me. She continued, her voice soft and hollow. "She never saw me, not really. She loved how I made her look on holidays and photos. But when I cried, she walked out. When I was scared, she told me to toughen up. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only truth I had. I'm not perfect either." Elara looked at me, eyes shining with something deeper than admiration, something far more dangerous. "You're the only one who didn't run." And that's when I realized something chilling. She hadn't just chosen this house for refuge. She'd chosen me. Not as a guardian, not as a stepmother, but as something else entirely. And I'd let her? Victor snored softly in the background. The wind rustled the lemon tree. And Elara, still holding the pruning shears, smiled as she said, "It's strange, isn't it? How easily a house becomes a stage. And everyone picks a role." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure if I was the rescuer in this story anymore, or the one being pulled under. The nights grew heavier after that, not just in weather but in weight. Victor was sleeping more, working later, grateful in that clueless way that his daughter was back and things felt normal again. He had no idea that underneath the dinner conversations and laundry loads, something far more complex was unfolding between Elara and me. A quiet war of glances, a push and pull of unspoken things. One night I found her waiting in the living room. Lights dimmed, fireplace crackling, though it wasn't cold. She sat curled into the corner of the couch with a blanket thumbing through one of my old journals. My breath caught. You shouldn't be reading that. She looked up unbothered. I only read the first page. The one where you wrote, I am a woman made entirely of what I cannot say aloud. I felt stripped, exposed, like she'd peeled back a part of me I hadn't meant to show. I was younger then, I said quietly. But you're still that woman, she replied, folding the cover shut. You still wear silence like it's armor. I walked toward her slowly, deliberately. And what do you wear, Elara? She smiled sharp like a knife tip under velvet. I used to wear need. Now I wear intent. A pause. Then, like she was offering a dare, you don't have to be afraid of me. But I was. Not because she might break me, but because she already had. Gently, elegantly, like water wearing away stone. The journal stayed on the table between us as I sat down. She didn't speak again, neither did I. We just listened to the fire. Then she did something that made my spine stiffen. She reached into the blanket, pulled out a single photo, and handed it to me. It was from the wedding. She and I were dancing, forced smiles, her hand too stiff in mine. I remembered the photographer trying to capture a mother-daughter moment. I hadn't realized she'd kept it. I hated you in this photo, she said. And now I asked, throat dry. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached forward and brushed a hair from my cheek, slow, reverent. You're the only person in my life who ever stayed, even after I made it hard. My heart thudded in my ears. I stood up too quickly, the blanket falling from her lap. You should go to bed, I said, voice clipped. She didn't argue. Just rose gracefully and walked past me so close I could smell her shampoo, feel the heat from her skin. At the stairs, she paused. I meant it, you know, she whispered. That night I called you my guardian angel. I meant every word. Then she disappeared up the stairs like a ghost, slipping back into the attic. I stood alone in the flickering glow, the journal beside me, the photo still trembling in my hand. And for the first time I asked myself, was she healing here? Or hiding? And was I protecting her? Or enabling something neither of us could name? The next morning I found the photo on my nightstand. No note, no explanation. Just the wedding picture of us dancing, her smile half forced, mine brittle. It had been tucked under the edge of my pillow like a secret planted to bloom. I should have felt angry, violated even. But I felt something worse. Complicit? At breakfast, Elara was calm, glowing almost. She wore one of my old silk blouses, ivory, with mother-of-pearl buttons. It fit her too well. She poured Victor's coffee-sliced fruit with eerie precision and asked if we should host dinner for his co-workers next week. Victor beamed. That's the Elara I missed, organized, thoughtful. He didn't notice how I stiffened at the table. He never did. When he left for work, I followed her into the laundry room where she was folding towels like nothing had happened. You put the photo in my room. She didn't stop folding. I did. Why? She looked up, eyes unblinking. Because I wanted you to remember what it used to be like, before we started pretending. I'm not pretending, I said, though it came out weaker than I wanted. No, she whispered. Then look me in the eye and tell me that night meant nothing to you. I didn't. I couldn't. The air between us became thick-charged, dangerous. Elara, you're my stepdaughter, I said finally. No, she said, voice trembling now. I'm your husband's daughter. A man who stopped touching you years ago. A man who looks at you like wallpaper. I slapped the towel down on the counter. This isn't a game. Her jaw clenched. I'm not playing. There it was again, that flicker of need under all the bravado. Not the seductive kind. The wounded kind. Like she was trying to climb out of a burning building, and I was the only hand reaching down. I don't know what you want from me, I said too honestly. Her voice cracked. I want someone to choose me. Without shame. It hit me in the center of the chest. 'Cause part of me did want to choose her. Not as a lover, not even as a daughter, but as something in between. Something unnameable. Later that night, I found another note folded neatly on my vanity. If this is wrong, why does it feel like the only thing that's ever made me feel whole? I tore it up, burned it in the sink. But I didn't forget it. Not the words, not the handwriting, and especially not the terrifying truth underneath it. Sometimes what we crave isn't love, it's recognition. And Elara had seen something in me no one ever had. Even if I was too ashamed to admit I liked being seen. Victor's co-worker dinner came and went like a glossy parade of small talk and overcooked salmon. I wore navy silk. Elara wore pale green, just enough to look appropriate, just enough to draw eyes. She played the charming daughter perfectly. No one would have guessed we barely tolerated each other 5 years ago. Or that in the quiet spaces between clinking glasses and meaningless laughter, she sometimes brushed against me. deliberately. Victor noticed none of it. He raised toasts, bragged about her return, called her his miracle. I excused myself twice to the bathroom, once to breathe, once to cry. The next day everything cracked. It happened during something stupid, folding laundry. I was separating towels from t-shirts when I found her bralette lacy too delicate to have been mine. I held it up, blinked once. "Elara," I called, "this isn't from my drawer, is it?" She came into the room, took one look at what I was holding, and smiled like it was a secret joke only we shared. "No," she said softly, "that one's just for you." I dropped it like it burned me. "Elara, you haven't touched me since that night," she said, arms crossed, voice low but steady. "You avoid rooms I'm in. You flinch when I get too close." "You kissed me," I snapped. "You were vulnerable, I should have stopped it." "Should have," she echoed, stepping closer. "But you didn't." She was right there now, between me and the dryer, close enough to smell the orange blossom oil she used. Her gaze locked to mine. Challenging. Begging. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. My voice was shaking. "Yes, you do," she whispered. "You just wish you didn't." I stepped back, heart racing. "You're his daughter." "I'm not a child," she said, "and he doesn't see you. I do." I pushed past her, fled the room, locked the bedroom door behind me. My reflection in the vanity mirror looked foreign, older, flushed, frightened. And not just because of what she'd said. Because I hadn't disagreed. Because part of me still felt that electric pull. That night, Victor climbed into bed beside me, asked if I was okay. "Tired," I said. He kissed my cheek. I turned away. And while he fell asleep, I stayed staring at the ceiling again, haunted by the shape of her silhouette in the laundry room, by how many times I could have shut this down and didn't. What frightened me most wasn't her persistence. It was the slow realization that I was starting to want her to keep trying. It happened on a Tuesday again. Like the first time. Victor was out of town. Another 3-day retreat for strategic alignment. That's what he called it. I didn't care. I didn't ask questions anymore. Our marriage had become a series of shadows. Things unsaid, moments ignored, love reduced to calendar notifications, and polite smiles over dinner. Elara made spaghetti that night. Real spaghetti, hand-rolled, pasta, garlic, cream sauce, fresh basil from the garden. I didn't ask where she learned it. I didn't ask why she was trying so hard. But I knew. It wasn't about food. It was never about food. We ate in the dining room for once, with candles lit and soft jazz humming from the speakers. A scene too intimate for two women who shouldn't share anything beyond a last name. We talked about books, about travel, about what life would look like if we weren't who we were. She asked me if I ever felt invisible in my own home. I laughed too hard, drank more wine than I should have. And when I stood to clear the dishes, I dropped a glass. It shattered across the tile. She rushed to help me clean, kneeling beside me, picking up shards. "I've got it," I said, but my voice wavered. "So do I," she whispered, brushing a fingertip against my knuckle. I looked at her. Too long, too deeply. That was the moment I should have left the room. Shut it down. But I didn't. She stood, I stood. And before I knew it, she kissed me again. No hesitation this time. And I let her. Her hands were on my face. Mine were in her hair. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't innocent. It was desperate, tangled, clumsy. I didn't stop her. Not when she pulled me closer. Not when we stumbled backward into the hallway. Not when we crossed the threshold into my bedroom. Only later, after the silence returned and our breathing slowed, did I realize what we'd done. What we couldn't undo. I sat on the edge of the bedrobe, clutched tight to my chest. She was curled beneath the covers, her eyes open, watching me like I might vanish if she blinked. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. "You did," she replied. "I'm not your..." She sat up. "You're not my mother, and I'm not a little girl. Stop using that to hide." I couldn't look at her. My hands were trembling, my mouth dry. "You think this is love?" I asked. She reached for my wrist, held it softly. "I think this is the first thing in years that's felt real." And in that moment I hated her. For seeing through me. For being right. And worst of all, for making me feel alive. 'Cause I knew what came next. Secrets never stay secret. Not forever. And we had just given this house something it would never unsee. The next morning the house was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the thick, suspended kind, like everything was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I woke early before Elara. Her side of the bed was warm but empty. I didn't hear the shower, didn't hear footsteps, only the faint buzz of the refrigerator and my heart pounding like it was trying to crawl up my throat. I couldn't look at the sheets, couldn't even bring myself to touch them. I sat at the edge of the bed robe, pulled tight, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. When I finally came downstairs, she was in the kitchen. wearing one of Victor's old flannel shirts, frying eggs. She looked content, like we hadn't just set fire to every rule that held this house together. Morning, she said gently, as if it were any other morning. I nodded, couldn't speak, just sat down at the table. She placed a plate in front of me. Eggs, toast, strawberries. A second cup of coffee already prepared how I liked it, black with a splash of oat milk. We ate in silence, until I finally said it. What happens now? She didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. That depends, she said. Do you regret it? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. What I felt was too messy to name. It wasn't just guilt. It wasn't just desire. It was something tangled and old and buried, something about never being chosen, never being touched gently, never being seen. Elara saw all of it, and that terrified me. I can't be what you want, I said finally. She stirred her coffee. I don't need you to be anything. I just want you to be honest. I looked at her, this woman who was once just a bitter presence in the corners of my life, now the most complicated thread tangled around my heart. She reached across the table, touched my hand. I'm not trying to destroy you, she whispered. I think part of you is already broken. I'm just filling in the cracks. And wasn't that the cruelest part? That she might have been right. Victor called later that afternoon. His voice on speaker felt like a ghost echoing through a church after a sin. How are my girls? He asked cheerfully. I swallowed. We're fine, I said. Quiet day. Elara smiled at me from the sink. And for a moment, one short, horrifying moment, I smiled back. I had lied to my husband. Not just with my words. With my body, with my silence, with my longing. And yet somehow in the worst of it, I had never felt more wanted. We were careful, for a while. We rehearsed normal like professionals. Dinner with Victor, casual errands, separate laundry baskets, a rhythm of plausible deniability. She returned to volunteering. I kept busy with gardening and grocery lists and wine club emails I never opened. We kept the secret under lock and key, but secrets have a scent, a weight, a rhythm all their own. They hum between words, slither into glances, nestle into pauses that shouldn't be there. And then one night, we got sloppy. Victor had grilled steak for dinner. Elara made a roasted beet salad. We drank wine. Too much. He went to bed early, mumbling something about spreadsheets and red wine headaches. Elara and I lingered in the kitchen. We were laughing. Actually laughing something about how Victor still thought Netflix asked, "Are you still watching just for him?" I was wiping the counter when she came up behind me and put her chin on my shoulder. It was sweet, innocent for a second. Then her hand slid around my waist. I froze. Elara, I whispered sharply, "Don't..." But it was too late. Because behind us near the hallway, Victor stood with his empty water glass in hand. His face wasn't angry. Not yet. Just confused. Tired, blinking. "Elara," he said slowly. She pulled away immediately, her face flushed. "Dad, I was just saying goodnight." He looked at me, then her, then me again. Something shifted in his eyes. He wasn't stupid. He was many things, distant, passive, inattentive, but not stupid. No one was saying anything, he said, his voice flat. Then he turned and walked away. We stood there in the kitchen for a full minute, the refrigerator humming like it might explode. Finally, Elara whispered he saw something. I nodded, yes. What do we do? I don't know. But I did know. Everything we'd done had been unspoken, unacknowledged. There was still room, narrow as it was, to retreat, to lie, to burn every bridge quietly and carry the shame in silence. But now the line wasn't private anymore. Now the truth was leaking into the edges of our lives. Victor didn't ask me about it the next morning, but he looked at me differently, touched my arm with hesitation, kissed my forehead like it might be the last time. That afternoon he left to run errands and was gone for 4 hours. When he came home, he didn't speak to either of us. He just went upstairs and shut the door. And I realized we weren't hiding anymore. We were being watched. The silence between Victor and me turned into something almost physical. It filled rooms before we entered them. It whispered at the dinner table. It slept between us like a third body. 3 days passed. 3 days of avoidance, half conversations, polite nods, no questions. But his eyes had changed. They followed me with suspicion, with calculation, until finally on the 4th evening he asked, "Can we talk just like that?" No lead-in, no warning, no chance to run. We sat on the back patio. The sun was setting, painting the yard in gold and orange. Elara wasn't home, or maybe she was watching from behind a curtain. Victor set his whiskey on the glass table, didn't look at me when he spoke. "I know something's wrong." I said nothing. "I thought at first it was just me," he went on, "getting older, losing touch. Maybe you were bored, maybe she was just fragile. But the other night I saw enough to know it's not just my imagination. My hands clenched in my lap. He turned to me finally. How far has it gone? I opened my mouth, closed it. Did she seduce you? He asked, voice cracking slightly. She didn't have to, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. So, you're saying this was mutual? It was complicated. Jesus Christ, he muttered, standing pacing. She's my daughter. She's an adult, I snapped, and she's broken, and so am I. He froze, looked at me like I'd just confessed to murder. You're my wife, he said, and you haven't touched me in almost 2 years. That doesn't give you permission to destroy my family. I stood too, my voice shaking. You think I planned this. You think I wanted it. I let her in because she had nowhere else to go, and I tried God. I tried to be good. But you don't know what it's like to be seen after years of being invisible. He stared at me, chest rising, mouth parted. She made me feel alive, I whispered, and I hated her for it. For a moment we just breathed. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. She told me you were her guardian angel. I blinked. She said you saved her. That you were the only one who ever made her feel safe, he said, voice breaking. I didn't think she meant it like this. I lowered my eyes. I didn't either, I said. He walked to the door, paused. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But this house, this family, it's broken. Then he went inside and I stayed there on the patio, the sky growing darker by the second. Later, when I came back and the lights were off, only one candle flickered in the hallway. And beside it, another note, in Elara's handwriting. You told me to be honest. Now it's your turn. The note sat untouched on my nightstand for hours. I didn't need to read it again. I had memorized the words. You told me to be honest. Now it's your turn. But what was my truth? That I had betrayed my husband. That I had crossed a moral line I'd never imagined possible. Or that for the first time in years, I had felt seen not as a wife, not as a mother figure, not even as a woman with duties, but as something closer to alive. That night, Elara waited for me in the garden. She always knew where I'd go when I needed to disappear. The lemon tree was blooming again, and her silhouette stood beneath it, framed in silver moonlight. I stepped outside barefoot, the grass wet and soft beneath me. She didn't speak. Not at first. When she finally turned to face me, I saw it fear. Not the coy defiance she'd used like a weapon these past few weeks, but something raw, wounded. Your father knows, I said softly. She nodded. I think he always suspected. A pause. Do you regret it? She asked. Everything. I didn't answer right away, because the truth was ugly. I regret what it did to him, I said finally, but I don't regret seeing you. Her eyes filled with something unnameable. Hope, grief. Maybe both. I wasn't trying to ruin your life, she whispered. I didn't know where else I could go. And then you looked at me like I was more than broken, like I was possible. That word split something open in me. I wasn't whole either, I said. Not before you, not during you, not even now. She stepped closer, not touching, just near enough for her warmth to radiate between us. What do we do? She asked. It was the same question she'd asked weeks ago in the kitchen. And this time I had an answer. We stop. Her breath caught. Why? Because wanting someone doesn't make it right. Because I've spent my whole life letting other people define who I am. And now I need to figure it out for myself, without anyone else's shadow over me. Not his, not yours. Her face fell, but she didn't protest. And that's how I knew she'd grown. Are you sending me away? She asked quietly. No, I said. I'm asking you to choose something better, for both of us. She nodded, just once, then turned to leave. But before she walked back into the house, she said, You were my guardian angel, you still are. But maybe angels don't stay. Maybe they just show up when we need them most. The back door closed softly behind her, and I stood in the moonlight, a woman stripped of every label I used to hide behind. No longer wife, no longer stepmother, just me. Whatever that meant. A week later, Elara left. No dramatic goodbye, no suitcases at dawn. Just a note on the kitchen counter beside a single lemon from the tree outside. I think I'm ready to be seen without needing to be saved. Thank you for being my mirror. She didn't leave a forwarding address. Victor and I didn't speak of her again, not directly. The silence between us shifted from tension to distance, then settled into something sadder politeness. We slept in separate rooms now, ate at separate times. We didn't argue. We didn't cry. We simply became ghosts in the same house. Some nights, I'd walk into the guest room, the one with the lavender walls and the old writing desk. I'd sit there and try to write, but the words wouldn't come. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I no longer knew who I was writing as. It took time to realize that grief doesn't only come from loss. Sometimes it comes from choice, from choosing to step back from something that made you feel alive, even if it was wrong, even if it burned you. One morning, I threw away the remaining notes she'd left behind. I didn't read them again. I didn't need to. They were etched in me already. But I kept the photo, the one from our wedding. Us dancing, not smiling, not angry, just suspended in something unresolved. It sits in the back of a drawer now. I take it out sometimes, not to mourn or relive, but to remember. Because Elara wasn't a mistake. She was a turning point, a storm, a mirror. She showed me how hollow I had become, how much I had silenced myself to keep everyone else comfortable, how deep a woman can bury her own needs to keep a house standing. And now I'm rebuilding, not as someone's wife, not as someone's savior, just as a woman who finally learned that being seen is not the same as being consumed. And if she were here standing in the doorway again with mascara-stained cheeks and shaking hands, I'd still let her in. But this time I'd hand her a map and send her to find herself not through me but beyond me. Because some angels fall, and some walk away,